The Holy Gospel according to St. John, chapter 10, verses 11 through 18. He calls his sheep by name. I will be reading from the Message translation. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd puts the sheep before himself and sacrifices himself if necessary. A hired man is not a real shepherd. The sheep mean nothing to him. He sees a wolf come and runs for it, leaving the sheep to be ravaged and scattered by the wolf. He's only in it for the money. The sheep don't matter to him. I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and my own sheep know me. In the same way, the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I put the sheep before myself, sacrificing myself if necessary. You need to know that I have other sheep in addition to those in this pen. I need to gather and bring them too. They'll also recognize my voice. Then it will be one flock, one shepherd. This is why the Father loves me, because I freely lay down my life, and so I am free to take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own free will. I have the right to lay it down. I also have the right to take it up again. I receive this authority personally from my Father. This is God's good word for God's good people. This has been quite a week, has it not? Let us pray. God, we thank you for waking us up this morning to beautiful sunshine, even if a bit chilly here in Milwaukee. We also give thanks for the fact that there has not been any rioting this week, that we have been able to collectively exhale as we take a breath, we take a moment to pause, and then we look at what are you asking us to do? How are you calling us to be sheep and shepherd in this world? Let us be open to what you have in store for us. Amen. And so, my title this morning for the sermon gives you a little bit of an idea of what I was wrestling with, and it is, what does Earth Day have to do with shepherds and wolves? So we're like, Earth Day, the environment, shepherds, and wolves. And then we get to throw in Psalm 23. And so if you look at all of the themes already that are going on between the Acts community and our Old Testament lesson, in our Testament lesson, and then you look at the Psalm, and then you look at our other lessons, you're just sort of like, oh my goodness, this is like a buffet of themes. Where do I start? Because they are all so rich. And obviously, if I preached on every single one of them, we would be here for probably 3 hours, which obviously is not going to happen. But it's just to say is that even if you weren't a good preacher, like even if you totally sucked, this is your Sunday, because the text is so good that it will preach itself. All you got to do is just read it, right? Read it slow and put some emphasis on the ends of certain words, and it just is already speaking to you. It's already breaking you open. Your spirit is getting prepared. But I must tell y'all, I think I'm a fairly good preacher, so that's not what I'm going to do. So we're going to have to go a little bit deeper. But I just love that right out of the gate, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And then in John's gospel with the first line, I am the shepherd. Lord, if ever there was a gimme, this is it. So clearly, we know that God is up to something. That in this particular time, on this particular Sunday, God has had the Spirit moving to give us all of these rich texts, so we just can't mess it up. Like, we just can't miss it. We can't be sort of the dull sheep that might get lost and not be able to still find our way back, because there's so much here that God is like, I've sent you Jesus, I've sent you the disciples, I've sent you the psalmist. There is no way you can't get this. And so we do have this familiar gospel and this psalm this week. And I think probably for a lot of you, it brings up different memories. When we think about this particular gospel, we think and we hear about the shepherds. It probably calls to mind when we were little in Sunday school, having the little popsicle sticks and the little cotton balls and the Elmer's glue, because we didn't have glue sticks then. We would get all messy making our little sheep. You remember that? And then we would have one black sheep and the rest little fuzzy sheep. And I don't remember what we did for the black, but we did something. And then I think about as we continue to go further, as we got older, we started to hear it in a different way as we were like maybe confirmation age or adult forum. And I know as a teen and even a young adult, I started thinking about, how we put away our white clothes at a certain time, but right now we're back in the season where we can wear white if it's warm enough for you. That Jesus, in a lot of these pictures that we have with the lamb, is in this white robe, and it's got this beautiful, really cute, cuddly little lamb, right? Either up on the shoulder or in his lap. And now, I didn't grow up on no farm. I am not a farm girl. I learned this when I was in El Salvador, and I had on my cute little sandals, and they were looking at me like, girl, what do you have on? Do you realize where you are? And even the sheep, they were cuddly, but they weren't quite so white. They're like a little tinge of gray because there was mud. They're wading in the grass. And I know it was a picture, but in my mind, when I saw that picture, the sheep was, or the lamb was cuddly, it was clean, and it smelled good. It didn't smell good. And I've never worn white hardly ever and kept it clean. So I don't know how you have this picture of Jesus in a white robe with a sheep, and everybody's clean, nobody's smelling nothing, and it just looks so pristine. That's just not real. And so I know from people in my own family who grew up on farms, and for some of you all who have grown up having farm animals, we know that this is not the reality, right? We know this is not the way it is, even if the picture looks wonderful. And so it makes us start to think, what does it really mean to be a shepherd of a sheep? When we know that sheep can go whatever way they want, they can get into trouble, they can make you work, as my husband told me when he was a little sheep herder on the ranch, make you work a lot because they're always off going to do something. Then you got to figure out how to keep the rest here and go get that one, and just all sorts of things. And if one does something stupid or misguided, then the other one is going to follow. And so you got to figure out a way to stop it before it gets out of control. And so I'm thinking about, is that what Jesus thinks about us? And obviously God does, because, all this lined up perfectly, because we always get into trouble. We always keep messing stuff up. Then we have to have someone pull us out, redirect us, so we can get back on track. And then I'm thinking about the psalm. The psalm, I know most of us, when we first hear it perhaps, think about it as a funeral psalm, because that's a lot of places where we hear it. But I remember as a child growing up with my grandmother that was one of the prayers that she would always pray, was Psalm 23, particularly on Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings. Don't know why those particular days, but I just remember that. And so for me, it hasn't always been associated with a psalm of lament or mourning, but one where I remember sitting with my grandmother, sometimes on her lap, sometimes on my knees while she was sitting in the chair, listening to her pray and then reciting it along with her. But today, I'm hoping that we're not just thinking about it in the funeral sense, but also in the ways that it can comfort us in the many paths that the shepherd is telling us that we will be taking. And that we can find that if we really listen, it's not about death alone, but it's a lot about living and how God has sent his son to accompany us on all these different paths in the different ways that we experience life. But as we get into this, we have to remember, what is our backdrop for all of this? It is the earth. Okay, so I'm tying it together, Earth Day. So the earth is part of our backdrop and all that is in it, meaning planet, people, plants, everything, all of God's good creation, which has always been the case. But oftentimes we often intentionally don't tie the two together the way I'm going to this morning. We sort of do an either or kind of thing rather than thinking of them always being in play together. I'd like to frame our conversation this morning by asking three main questions. One is, how are we taking care of the planet and all that is in it? How are we shepherding our resources? And how are we caring and protecting life in all of its forms? So ultimately, the quintessential question is, how are we taking care of our sheep? And I think that this question is particularly timely given this past week and what occurred this past week. This has been an incredible week indeed, with highs and lows that none of us could have predicted. I think it is safe to say that most of us were sort of sitting on the edge, hoping and praying for a guilty verdict. I didn't even have to set this up because I know everybody knows what I'm talking about. The whole world was on the verge with us. And when that verdict came down, that Chauvin was guilty on all three counts of killing George Floyd, I think most of us were in disbelief, like, did I just hear this right? And then when it started to sink in, it was like I could finally exhale, but not fully. And I say that because at the same time that we were so elated that finally there was a step in the right direction of acknowledging the brutality against BIPOC people, and in particular, Black people right now, that we had 3 more deaths. Dwayne Wright, the young man, Toledo in Chicago, and then is it Tamika? I can't remember exactly her name, but I see her in that pink jogging suit. Yes, on TV, that young woman. And immediately I was like, one step forward, and then a few steps back. And then I was also thinking, because we know on the one child, we keep asking why the taser was not used, knowing that they feel different, even if they were on the same side, which they weren't, but we know they feel different. Why was this child with a knife? Was it that they didn't think of a taser? Were they not close enough? But I think a lot of us in our minds were like, why was the gun the first response? Like deadly force. And so again, I'm sure that's going around the world as well. But it makes us think about who is the shepherd and who are the sheep and who are we following. And I've been struggling with this passage all week because of our piece in this. Maybe you, like me, have questions about why is it so darn difficult to deal with our siblings when we profess to love and follow Jesus, to do what Jesus has told us to do. But the other part of what we heard today is that there are some sheep in wolves' clothing that are hanging out with us. They were here long before some of us were even born, and they will continue to be here even when we're gone. The reality is though, in our times, they have just upped their game because they have technology and all sorts of things that make it more sophisticated, more smooth, more slick. And so there may be some misguided sheep that are following the wrong shepherd and not seeing that on the inside it's really a wolf. And I don't mean only the people, because this is bigger than just people in the sense of it's not just one person to another person, but these wolves have also built elaborate systems that restrict access to some of us, be that because of the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, species, whatever. Take your pick, because the list is exhaustive. My good friend, Reverend Angie Kabeb, who lives in the Twin Cities and has been speaking for some time on ABC, I think it's ABC News, Channel 12 for us anyway, and also has been one of the faith leaders that has been speaking out on GMA 3, Good Morning America. And we've been talking regularly because she's always like, you know, with her sort of sister circle, can I say this on TV? Do I need to tone it down a little bit? Just thinking about, can I be the real me? And I said, Reverend Angie, you need to be just like the disciple Paul. You need to put it out there, be authentic, and just tell it like it is. And so she said, well, I want to know, and this is my question for the Good Shepherd, what about the black sheep? She said, I keep thinking about what happened this week with George Floyd and the fact that, thankfully, Minneapolis didn't get torn up all over again. She goes, but at the same time, there were 3 more victims, and what does that say about our nation? What does it say about our people? How did we get here? And I said, well, beloved, we did not just get here by accident. Oh, no. This was deliberate and systematic. But of course, like good little sheep, some of us followed blindly. And others, well, perhaps they were the wolves in sheep clothing with a different agenda. And as the little sheep started to open their eyes and realize that they had been following the wrong shepherd, it was a bit too late. So given our context this past week, I have to ask, who is protecting the black, the BIPOC, the poor sheep? I want you to think about this for a minute. I want you to think about the text again from John, that I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down their life for the sheep. But the hired hand, the one who is not the shepherd and does not own anything, not even the sheep, that when the wolves show, they leave. They're like, stuff just got real up in here, I'm out. You're on your own. Now, we're talking about own as in care and protect. And I feel I needed to point that out given our historical context in this country and some of the craziness that continues to happen in our very midst. So when we say, who are these wolves? Jesus tells us that they are false teachers and prophets who look like sheep, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. They are false teachers and leaders who rise up in the church and, more importantly, elsewhere to satisfy their hunger by feeding on the sheep rather than feeding the sheep. Historically, we know that we have seen forced migration of indigenous peoples on this very land in which we live, that our native indigenous people have been displaced from their land, that they were weakened by exposure to diseases that were brought by the invaders, the colonists, and then systemically, they were wiped out so that the new settlers could take the prime real estate and relegate the strongest that survived to what we now call the Badlands. And then black bodies were brought across the Atlantic Ocean during the Middle Passage to have their culture, names, and family ties be stripped from them as they were considered not to be fully human. In fact, we know by law only 3/5 of a human. So they were treated worse than even a despised animal in our antebellum South. Shepherds or wolves. Shepherds that knew what was best for these folks created systems to further divide and conquer by taking native children from their families and indoctrinating them into a colonized way of being so that they would not want to associate with their own people, that they would lose their own culture, their own language, and be caught between two worlds where they don't fit anywhere. And similar to black people who were systematically separated into field and house slaves, so that the preferences that were given to lighter-hued blacks became internalized within the group to discriminate against each other, so that the work of these particular shepherds could be perpetuated and continue to happen even today. And all of this, here's the kicker, y'all, all of this was done in the name of the good book, the Bible, Christianity. Now that may be true, but what part of the Bible and Christianity? Because we know all of it's not good, and taken out of context can be justified for anything. And then we get to this planet Earth and all that is in it. All that was in it was given to all of us, entrusted to all of us. To do what? To respect and celebrate each of our cultures, our languages and beliefs about the natural world, and our roles in healing ourselves. To ensure environmental justice, to promote economic alternatives which would contribute to the development of environmentally safe livelihoods, and to secure our political and economic and cultural liberation that has been denied over 500 years of colonization and oppression, resulting in the poisoning of our communities, our land, and genocide of some folks. Thus, are we really surprised that numerous environmental insults have happened, that they're continuing to happen, that we're denying science, that we're denying what's really going on? We see it all the time: exposures to hazardous waste, contaminated water in a supposedly first world country, air pollution. And all of these things have collectively been slowly eroding our health, but particularly the health of BIPOC and low income, which equals poor, individuals for decades. The dire reality is that the higher levels of exposure among poor people and non-white folks are compounded by the barriers to testing and health care, which leave them less likely to receive a diagnosis, let alone treatment. We know that an environment of consistent toxic exposures can lead to cascading health problems. Everyday toxins like pesticides, mold, and mildew, which have been found to be particularly common in public housing. Now go figure, who's shepherd that poor people should have good places to live, but under what conditions? Who's shepherding? Who's in wolves' clothing? And because of this, living in these public housing places that are not up to par, we see increased inflammation in folks, chronic inflammation that raises one's risk for complications ranging from weight gain to degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, autoimmune diseases, and diabetes. Simultaneously, continued environmental insults increases one's risk for a numerous form of cancers, respiratory and cardiovascular complications. We always hear about how children who are born in poor communities and dire communities seem to have breathing issues. They always have asthma. Have we noticed that? And now we've heard that these same communities are more vulnerable to COVID. Am I right, Dr. Rose? Just check me on my facts. Okay, so we got an expert here across the nation who is saying this is indeed the case. So think of it like this. If you live in a place that has constant environmental insults that keep assaulting the wounds that have been exacted upon your body that you never get to heal, your body never has the opportunity to heal because it's constantly coming at you, then we must connect the lack of true shepherding of these BIPOC and poor bodies of so many Americans that they are fighting off way too much to continuously be able to recover. And sadly, we must also acknowledge that this environmental inequity cannot be achieved without racial equity. We have to be honest about the predicament that our systems and structures have put in place for BIPOC communities and poor people alike. So do you see how these environmental racist policies disproportionately leave stressors that intensify existing health disparities for so many people, planet and people? Do you see how land use zoning policies, meaning redlining, and discriminatory housing practices intensifies threats for poor and BIPOC communities? Do you see now how the shepherds are really wolves that are distorting and perverting the systems and the truth, and that they're duping all of us? So we have to decide, as people of God, the path that we were willing to walk. Jesus is both the shepherd and the sheep, as he states in the gospel this morning. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. It is a relationship of mutuality. It goes both ways. He is both, and it looks different on the various paths that we take, as is mentioned in the psalm today. So then our task is to create a reconciling and reconciled socio-environmental community. And it must be clear here that the obstacle is not our diversity, it's not biology, it's not our structures and our systems alone. It is the fact that we are so focused on continuing injustice and moral privilege and exclusion that we get lost about what's right and who we're to follow. You see, environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, culture, education, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of our environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Fair treatment means that no group of people, including racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic groups, should bear a disproportionate share of the negative consequences resulting from industrial, municipal, and commercial operations, or the execution of federal, state, local, and tribal environmental programs and policies. All of this stuff is what Jesus is talking about. Environmental racism is a part of it. It's systemic. It is rooted in the devaluing of non-white lives, and it lifts up the hoarding of wealth, of being very individualistic to the extent of harming others. And it has been built into our very public policies. So you see that we must dismantle environmental racism, but it requires transformational policies. This is God language. Whenever you hear transformation, that's God language in the midst of where we live civilly. Because we need something that can provide both restoration to the land and reparations to the people that have endured this form of violence and exclusion. The Good Shepherd tells us that he sacrifices his life for the sheep and that the hired hand will run away. So we learn from Jesus that he loves us so much that he will and does lay his life down for us to protect us from these evil ones, these wolves in sheep's clothing. And not only protect, but to deliver us. But we can learn so much more about the Good Shepherd from David in Psalm 23. The truth that Jesus is the Good Shepherd should give us all hope. I know it gives me hope, because it's the relationship between the two, even though it gives me hope, that also challenges me. I'm challenged to be like a sheep, and that's hard for me because I'm headstrong and I'm always like, have to be right, even when I know that I may not be right. I can concede, but it's hard. And the other thing is that to be a sheep, what do we have to be? Obedient. And sometimes when you can't see the whole picture, it's hard to stay the course, right? We want to see the whole picture so that when we go through something we don't like, or we get pulled in a way that we don't like and say this is too hard, or this is too icky, or this just doesn't seem right, we can then quit and say, well, I tried, but this just wasn't worth it. But a true sheep is obedient and trustworthy and follows the shepherd. And if Jesus is your shepherd, then you won't be steered wrong. A disciple of Christ who allows the Good Shepherd to lead them along peaceful streams has their soul restored even in the midst of all the chaos that is happening around them. When the shepherd is guiding you through the dark valleys, you know that you're not alone because they are walking with you. Jesus is with you, that when you feel like you can't take another step, Jesus is carrying you and taking it with you. So acknowledging and even honoring Jesus, even in these kinds of times, we need to be disciplined. That's where that rod comes in, that we're like, ew. But we need it. But it's the rod of love. It's the rod of discipline that will keep us on the right track, down the right path. And reluctantly, it's the one that we don't like, but if we accept it, protects our soul. It keeps it intact. See, this is why when we hear Psalm 23, we need to be thinking about it as the one that walks with us, that lives with us every day in those places that we go. Not just when we get to the end where we know God's already got us if we've been right. And even if we've been wrong, there's a whole lot of mercy and grace, right? That we hope we're still going to be with him. But even more importantly, particularly in our faith tradition, Jesus, the shepherd, shows up when we gather at his table. We're often reminded that the good shepherd is also the sacrificial lamb, that in laying down his life, he takes it up again. And when we too participate in that dying and rising, when we eat the bread and we drink from the cup, it's the cup of salvation. We know that Jesus then abides in us. We don't have to worry about what the lip service is or what other folks are saying, all that noise, white noise and chatter, because we know we've been there and that Jesus, when we partake, is with us. And if Jesus abides in you, then you already know you're blessed. You've already got the pure gift. My siblings in Christ, we are the beloved community, and this is from which our liberation comes. Freedom to be better and to do better because the shepherd is guiding us. So finally, as we step up to care and protect for the environment and those that are in it, we have to remember we are like the shepherd. We are Imago Dei. We are the image of God enfleshed. Know that environmental justice affirms the need for urban and rural ecological policies to clean up and rebuild our cities and our communities, both urban and rural, to be in balance with nature, not against it, to honor the cultural integrity of all of our communities, and to provide fair access for all to the full range of the God-given resources for all of us. So again, the question, what does it mean to be a shepherd? I'm going to use the words loosely from Vincent Harding. Together we may stand in the sacred waters of the Milwaukee River and Lake Michigan, transformed and transforming, listening to its laughter and burning with its tears, recognizing in that ancient flow the indelible marks of human blood, yet grounded and buoyed by hope, courage, and an unfathomable, amazing grace. Keeping the faith and creating new ways of being faithful so that we may enter the terrible and the magnificent and struggle for the recreation of our collective America. Finally, we recite Psalm 23 this week, not as part of a funeral liturgy, but for many in the context of the Holy Eucharist. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. I know that sounds a bit dicey because most of us don't want to eat with our enemies. But we can because Jesus is leading us to still waters. Jesus is calming our soul as we partake of him with even those that we might count as enemies against us. Yes, we're back to Jesus' insistence that he brings us all into one fold, friend, stranger, outcast, enemy, and that when we feast at his table, barriers are broken, divisions are overcome, unity is enacted. And in tasting this goodness, we discover that we have everything we need, for the Lord is our shepherd, and we shall not be in want. Amen.